Can't believe it. I have the opportunity to speak to Stephen Pressfield, who has basically said, for God's sake, don't ask me any questions about, my nonfiction books. Let's get this out of the way once, and let's go back to doing the work that you're really doing. And that's kind of why I have you here. I'm a giant fan of Turning Pro. My girlfriend Jacqueline said, you've got to bother this man. Why did you say you didn't quite want to do interviews on it? I mean, if this is sort of the new good book, why take away the sort of natural hunger people have now that they've read it to bother you about it?
Chris, I wish I could really answer it. I've thought about this a lot, and I haven't come up with a real explanation. I just know that when I do interviews and I'm sort of out there pimping this stuff, I feel not happy with myself afterwards, And also, I think a lot of it has to do with people are lousy interviewers, mostly people that are doing blogs and stuff like that. They're not Charlie Rose, and they will ask questions like, well, what is your book about? Which, of course, is a totally unanswerable question, because if you could answer that, you wouldn't have written the book. So, and the other thing I think is that when you have to reduce something to sound bites, particularly something that has depth to it, it trivializes it, and you feel like you've betrayed your own muse and your own integrity. Now, I know that goes counter to the whole idea of promoting, your stuff. Everybody does promote their stuff. So this is a lousy answer, Chris. I know I'm not kidding.
No,
is that I think you're the only one I'm talking to on this. I think I'm going to do one more with Jonathan Fields with my partner Sean, mainly because I'm friends with Jonathan and I'm going to do that, and because Sean will be there. But basically, my single 3-word answer to any question interview is buy the book. Even though I know that makes no sense, because why would anybody buy it if they don't know what it is? But that's my answer. I don't like to do it.
I'm happy to share you with a good guy like Jonathan. He's definitely worth it as well. So, all right. Let's do just a quick basics of economics, though, as to why not go out and do speeches on this. A speech is a strange thing, because essentially people will pay me a good deal of money to go and say something that I wrote about years ago, and that they could read as many times as they want for free. I command what I command for speaking, and you'd get much more based on your body of work and all that. You just don't want a few extra $100,000 a year, or?
No, I don't. It's funny, on certain subjects, I would be very happy to speak. On a subject that was, for instance, I'm working on a nonfiction book now that's about an actual subject, not Turning Pro or something like that. And when that's ready, I'll be very glad to talk about that. But maybe it's because Turning Pro and the War of Art are too close to me. They're too much about my own struggles and stuff like that. And also, I think they really cut deep into the person who's reading it. And you should see some of the emails that I get from people. I'm sure you can imagine. In the privacy between the pages of a book, in the one-on-one communication between an author and a writer, the writer can make confessions about his own failings and his own lack, or failures of nerve and stuff like that. And because it's private, it's okay. And the reader, at the same time, can, when they read something that hits them between the eyes, they know that nobody is seeing their face, nobody is aware of them. It's totally private, and they can have that sort of internal epiphany at that moment. That's the communication that happens in a book. When you're up on a stage, for me, if I'm up on a stage, and I never speak, I go only to like military things about some of my, and that's just because I respect our guys in the service and I want to support them. But I would not talk about the War of Art or Turning Pro on a stage for $100,000.
It's interesting, in doing some of my research ahead of this. one of the things I was looking through your Amazon reviews, and you are ridiculously well read by the U.S. military for obvious reasons. I mean, you've done all your work, you've done your homework, but you've gone beyond that in sort of really digging into their psyche. So it's kind of interesting to contrast that with what you just said about war and art and turning pro, because what you're saying is, war of art. I always say on. What you're saying
You're not
is
the only one. So
it's terrible though. What you're saying is it's so intimate. And that you want that intimacy to stay that way, whereas sort of working in the tapestry of history is okay because we can sort of abstract a little. Is that a male thing, perhaps?
It's a very good question. I don't know, but certainly in a novel, let's say, you can use the concepts that are in Turning Pro or War of Art and make them into metaphors. Mm-hmm. And so it takes the immediate confessional aspect of it away from it. And so it turns weapons grade plutonium into something that you can handle in your bare hands, which I think is why the novel is such an interesting means of communication between an author and a reader. It's not direct, it's indirect. It's speaking in metaphors and in symbols, and so it takes some of the white heat off of some of this stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense, Chris, but
it does.
That's my answer.
Yeah, I'm just curious. When you said this, there's two things that are going through my head. One is that you want the intimacy, and two, in Turning Pro, at every turn you shun the whole social networking world. Basically, you're like, you could be a pro, or you can spend your time over here tweeting. Have a nice day. Bob Stein, a few years ago, I ran into him at a O'Reilly Tools of Change conference, and he's part of something like the Institute for the Future of a Book or something like this. They gave him a few $1 million to define what a book was, which I felt like, I know, it's a angle. So his answer, which stuck to me, I'm not good at quotes, but it was this: a book is a user-driven media where readers and sometimes authors congregate. And that was the sort of new definition of a book, because it's true of a paper volume, because sometimes the author is congregating with the reader and whatnot. But of course, this stretches to this sort of new virtual world. Again, sort of with the why not interviews and all that. Why not a Turning Pro community that a lot of people would spend a lot of time blathering on? I think I know the answer, but I'm curious.
I think I would have to hang myself after that, Now, it's not that I totally shun social media. I mean, I have a blog, and I blog, I do a Writing Wednesdays blog, which is like a continuing chapter of the War of Art or the Turning Pro. But that's different because it's the written word. It's not me in my own, I don't even know why. I don't know why. It's not me on stage getting paid to do something. It's not me shilling anything. It's me trying to give something to people. It's free. Nobody has to pay anything. Nobody has to go anywhere to get it. I don't know. That way seems, to have some honesty to it.
Interesting. It's again, they're all choices. They're all ways that one can sort of view it, and I like the premise, because really a lot of what you're trying to do is, say to people that the work stands on its own. Don't bother me with these interviews because it's all there. What else am I going to say? If I wanted to say more, I would have put it in the pages of the book. You made it.
Another thing I'll say, Chris, as I'm trying to understand this myself, is people think if you write a book like The War of Art or Turning Pro, that's what you're doing for a living. Right. And so they say, well, gee, come and speak to our group, and give us some motivational, but that's not what I do for a living. I'm a writer that writes books. And I just happen to do these two, one in 2002 and one in 2012. So one short book every 10 years. And my theory is, there it is. If it's of help to you, help yourself.
Just come and grab it, and then otherwise leave. Yeah. Before these two books came out, the book that I used to try to show people when they ask questions about how to be a writer, one of my favorites to point out was the second half of Stephen King's On Writing, because it was kind of one of those first books that I read that like punch you in the mouth and say, just shut up and go write.
I love that book. It was a great book.
I owned a shelf full of those other kind, You know, the flowery, let's do this kind of books that just really never convinced me to write. They just convinced me to read more books about how to write. Is there some of this in that? I mean, is this tough love, Stephen?
In a way, it is. I mean, if I often think, not that I knock workshops and speaking things like that. I mean, they help in some way, but I don't think you ever saw Henry Miller going to one of those things. I don't think Jack Kerouac ever went to one of those things, and I think you should go to one and then go home and get to work.
It's funny because one of the questions I wanted to ask was that the blog post I remember most out of your last few months was the Henry Miller's Commandments, because I had never read Tropic of Cancer, and I can't remember if it was you in some interview somewhere that turned me onto it or not, but I read the book and I thought, oh my gosh, this is
good for you, Chris. I actually stole that from another blog called Brain Pickings, and
Got it.
So I don't want to take credit for that, but that was great.
I see what you're saying here. Okay, I never noticed that before. I just skipped right to the commandments when I read it, but I went and refound the post, and so it's funny you just happened to mention him. I say something somewhat similarly. No one ever asked Hemingway what kind of pencils he used to write. Do you think that that's a part of the same thing that tells you I don't want to talk about this, is because people get too hung up on the technology and the equipment and the tools and the right time of day and all that?
Or they get hung up on the process of how do I get to do it? What do I need to learn to do it? How many workshops do I have to go to do it? When the answer is just to do it, and you'll learn as you go. I can't imagine Henry Miller standing up on a stage talking to anybody about how to write a book or something like that. He would just say I think that everything I've written is on that subject, so just read it.
That's interesting. The work is the work. In finishing Turning Pro, like you said, you might do one of these every handful of years now, or every 10 years perhaps is what you said. This frees you to go back to the work that you really want to do, which is tell stories through fiction and really kind of move things along. When you have people kind of see you from the outside, if you had your druthers and somebody bumped somebody else's elbow and said, "There goes Stephen Pressfield," what do you hope they say?
Well, I have no idea. I don't know what to say to that, Chris.
Sometimes I ask questions that I don't know if I know the answer to. Part of the Turning Pro thing was a bit of a philosophy. It was saying, learn to be patient, learn to work on, your inner guts, mistakes and things like that. This is the part that feels so intimate to me. I guess in dealing with that in fiction, you can hide it a lot. I guess that's why the question about being male or something. In us having to deal with our emotions, does some of this dislike of some of the new stuff, the videos and standing on stage, is it because it's too raw? It doesn't give you the chance to put it into a different kind of package?
That could be. I'm trying to think about that right on the spot as you're asking, Chris.
Yeah, I should tell people I never pre-deliver answers. I never pre-deliver questions. I want you to, be messed up and miserable right in the moment.
And I wish I had an answer off, but I don't.
It's all good.
Yeah.
All right. So how do we keep a lot more people from bothering you for interviews about Turning Pro? This is, clearly.
Well, it's all right. I'm just not going to do anymore. You're the last one. So
I snuck in, me and Jonathan.
It's okay.
That's awesome. Stephen
One of the
Pressfield.
concepts behind this Black Irish Publishing, that's me and my partner Sean that brought out Turning Pro, is that we're just thinking of it as, great. That was one of the things we said. We're thinking of it as just like a mom and pop pizza place, and we're not trying to rule the world or do anything like that. What part of the goal is to keep expectations low and not have to do some of the things that neither of us particularly want to do.
Interesting that. So in a way, you're also using some of the web's tools to keep the world at bay a little bit, because you can sneak into the press, push all 4 or 5 icons that are on the site, and pretty much there's just not a whole ton of to do. So in a way, you've even right at that gate, when they want to find more info about the site, they'll get the bare bones, and you're going to keep speaking through the work. It seems like.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. A publishing question, I guess, if you're willing. I published my first 4 books in mainstream press. I don't know that I'll ever do any more mainstream press unless there's an incredible paycheck that goes with it, to be God honest, because I just want more access, more control. I want the ability to do more things. I want the rights to flow differently. You started your own little imprint. Is that the same mindset? What I mean for the new authors out there?
No, that's a good question, Chris. It's a very good question. The book that I'm working on now, I'm doing totally through mainstream press, and it's appropriate for that. And I think that the mainstream for certain types of work, for like serious novels or serious nonfiction, that's really the way to go, because self-publishing, I don't think you can ever break out of the ghetto of sort of self-help motivation, corporate success, that kind of thing. I don't think people are really going there to find a good novel or a good nonfiction book. So I'm all in favor of the mainstream press. And you just have to go in knowing that, it's their ball game, But if they're willing to back a book and come up with an advance, and the other thing, of course, is that with the mainstream press, your book gets into bookstores, which doesn't happen when you're publishing it yourself, because you just don't have the distribution apparatus, and also you don't have the real credibility that comes with a Knopf or Random House or something like that. So, and you also don't have the advantage of hopefully a great editor, which is not a guarantee at all. But I'm lucky. I'm working with Sean Coyne. He's my partner, and he is a great editor. So, but yeah, I would not hesitate at all to go through the mainstream press forever. But it is fun to do, in doing books like Turning Pro or The War of Art, that to be able to bring it out yourself and control it. Because instead of making 35 cents a copy, you make $3.50 a copy. So you don't have to sell. You only need to sell 1/10 as many books, and you don't have the feeling that you're being ignored and you're being screwed over, which you do get, as you well know.
What? No. Publishers always respond right away and always give you the sense that they know how to market your book. I guess maybe that's part of it too, why you don't mind the mainstream, is because you don't want to market your own book. You have a discomfort, it seems, of talking about yourself. And I know that feeling, because I think we've all met that guy. We've all met that person that wanders around with like their book in their hand near their head. saying, here's the book I wrote. But I guess, that's the trade-off, is that you allow them to do the marketing. All right. In closing, what's the sort of biggest fictional mountain left for you to climb? I mean, out of those dozen books, I mean, you've tackled war in a variety of interesting and beautiful ways. You've done some things that, speak to going for the depth of a character, like killing Rommel. What's sort of a mountain left to climb for you?
It's a very good question, Chris. And I'm kind of a believer. I'm a believer in the muse. And I believe that the muse kind of leads you from one project to the next, and it's almost impossible to tell what is going to come up. I think that the artist's journey is a journey towards his own authenticity and towards whatever his own specific or her own specific destiny is. Like Lady Gaga's got quite a different one from Toni Morrison or from you or me. And so I don't have any mountain out there in my mind that I'm aiming at. I'm just trying to follow that voice inside me as each, kind of like, I'm sure that Neil Young doesn't know from one album to the next what the next album's going to be. He finishes one and suddenly he's thinking about something else. And so that's all I can do, I think, is just sort of follow that muse and see where she takes me. And I'm just a servant of the muse. That's it.
Well, judging by Neil Young's choice to cover a bunch of Americana for his latest release, I can't wait to see where his muse goes next. Steven Pressfield, I've eaten up tons of your time, and you're a busy professional, as I've been told to become myself. We can go to stevenpressfield.com to learn a ton more about you, and Black Irish Press to pick up Turning Pro and all that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks. It was a good interview. Thanks for the good questions. It wasn't as painful as I thought it was going to be.
That's my golden life, really.